Imagine you are the head of a trading corporation controlling maritime routes in the 19th century. Your captains unconditionally obey orders. Newspapers print your reports, and doctors diagnose what is beneficial to the treasury. But you have a problem. The keepers you send to the old towers are going mad en masse and leaving the world due to strange symptoms caused by what is inside the mechanisms. If it is acknowledged that this is radiation sickness and mercury vapor poisoning from the working reactors, you will have to close the lighthouses and halt trade, admitting your helplessness against ancient technologies. One gesture from you, and the torturous death from toxic radiation officially becomes romantic melancholy from loneliness and the noise of the waves. What will you choose? To save people's lives by abandoning the use of dangerous but necessary devices, or to doom them to certain death, attributing everything to the call of the sea, so that your trading empire can continue to thrive? Now let's see how it looked in real history. Literature is full of romantic stories about lighthouse keepers. Loneliness among the raging waves, the endless noise of the surf, months without human contact. We are told how these people went mad from longing and melancholy. Beautiful, tragic legends. However, if we open the medical reports of the 19th century, the picture will be quite different. Doctors of that time described a strange set of symptoms. Hair loss in completely healthy men. Hallucinations that began suddenly and intensified week by week. Hand tremors, inability to hold objects. Skin ulcers that did not heal for months. Bleeding gums and falling teeth. Dissociation of personality, when a person stopped recognizing themselves in the mirror. This is not a mental disorder. Any modern doctor would immediately say, this is a classic picture of severe poisoning. Add to this the impact of powerful electromagnetic fields, and you will get exactly the symptoms that were recorded 150 years ago. But the doctors of the 19th century knew nothing about radiation or mercury vapors. Therefore, they attributed everything to melancholy and loneliness. The most obvious explanation is that people really could not withstand isolation. Okay, then answer one question. Why were the symptoms physical? Why did hermits in mountain monasteries, who spent years in complete solitude, not lose their teeth and hair? Why did sailors, who floated for months without land, not develop sores? The lighthouse keepers did not die of melancholy. They slowly left life because of something specific that was inside these towers. Something that continued to work, radiate, poison. And this is where the most interesting part begins. To understand what killed these people, one needs to look into the heart of the lighthouse. There, where the official history turns into engineering absurdity. It is about the rotational mechanism and what drove it. For the smooth rotation of a giant optical lens weighing several tons, mercury baths were used. Bowls filled with liquid metal. The lighthouse at Saint Augustin in France used 750 kilograms of mercury. At Bell Rock, almost a ton. Hundreds of liters of toxic mercury in each lighthouse. Officially, we are told that mercury reduced friction to almost zero. The lens seemed to float on the mirror-like surface, rotating at the slightest effort. This sounds logical for those who have never worked with hazardous materials. Try to imagine the real picture. A wooden ship. A 9-point storm. Dock workers are trying to hold barrels of mercury on the deck, each weighing 100 weight. One misstep, one crack in the hull, and the entire crew is doomed. The spilled mercury evaporates, the vapors enter the lungs, and slow poisoning begins. Deliver this to the rock in the middle of the ocean. Raise it up the narrow spiral staircase to the top of the tower. Pour it into the bowls so that not a drop is spilled. And all this for what? For reducing friction? When ordinary bearings, even the most primitive ones, coped perfectly with the rotation of the mechanisms of that time. I also initially thought that it was about the overcaution of engineers, until I came across the numbers. In ordinary industry of the 19th century, mercury was used extremely rarely. Mirrors, thermometers, scientific instruments, small amounts under strict control. But here, hundreds of liters in each lighthouse around the world. This is not overcaution. This is a deliberate use of a rare, expensive, and deadly substance. So mercury was not needed for reducing friction. It had a different purpose. To understand what that was, one has to recall ancient texts. In Indian manuscripts about Vimanas, the flying chariots of the gods, mercury is described as a key element of engines, not as lubrication, as a source of energy. Mercury is an ideal conductor, capable of interacting with electromagnetic fields. If it is spun in a closed circuit, a powerful vortex effect is created. The vortex generates energy, or it creates fields that can influence the space around them. That is why alchemists called mercury living silver and considered it the basis of the transmutation of matter. Now look at the very structure of the lighthouse. A stone tower, narrow, widening downward. Often in the walls, there are metal structures, reinforcement. This entire tower stands in salt water, an ideal electrolyte. Before you is a ready-made schematic for collecting atmospheric electricity, a gigantic inductor coil. And here, another oddity is discovered. Many old lighthouses are equipped with ventilation systems that make no sense. Shafts that run through the entire barrel of the tower. Complex air ducts lined with bricks of perfect geometry. What is the purpose of such complexities, if all that is needed is to divert smoke from a single kerosene lamp? If you think this is for the comfort of people, explain one thing. Go inside the old lighthouse and look up. You'll feel like you're inside an organ pipe. The sound reflects and is amplified. The walls resonate at specific frequencies. This is not a ventilation system for people. This is an acoustic resonator, a waveguide, a device that converts vibration and sound into a directed flow of energy. Lighthouses did not shine. They emitted. Mercury baths created a rotating plasma field. The stone tower acted as an amplifier and a directional antenna. All of this together turned the lighthouse into a generator, into a source of energy that operated on principles lost or deliberately hidden from modern civilization. And now it becomes clear why the watchmen were dying. They lived inside a functioning reactor, damaged, unbalanced, but still active. They tried to heat the room with firewood and coal, not realizing that systems emitting fields were working beneath their feet. Mercury vapors were slowly poisoning them. Electromagnetic radiation was destroying their cells, and they attributed everything to fatigue and sea air. If the lighthouses generated energy, then this energy went somewhere. It was not simply dissipated into space, but transmitted further. Through what channels? The answer may be hidden underground. More precisely, under the water and the rocks on which these towers stand. In old reports from the inspectors, Mentions of basements occasionally slip through. Not ordinary storage rooms, but real mines that go deep into the rock. They are officially explained as storage facilities for kerosene and provisions. But why does a lighthouse need a basement that is tens of meters deep? In the dampness, where water constantly stands, metal containers will rot within a year. Food will spoil within a week. Modern enthusiasts attempting to explore these underground chambers face strict prohibitions. Access is closed for safety reasons. However, when an agreement is reached and ground-penetrating radar scanning is conducted, the equipment behaves strangely. The sensors show anomalies and then malfunction. The programs return an error, and in the rare cases when the data is managed to be processed, the results indicate the presence of voids, of correct geometric shape, extending deep into the rock mass. Okay, let's assume these are natural karst cavities. Then explain why they are located directly beneath the lighthouses. Why do they have smooth walls and right angles, visible even in blurry georadar images? And most importantly, why are researchers so stubbornly not allowed in there? These mines are not storerooms. They are tunnels. Communications that connected the lighthouses into a single network. A network that operated when these rocks were not islands in the ocean, but hills on land. When roads ran between them. When underground cable channels or pipelines stretched, through which energy was transmitted. Imagine this. A lighthouse on top of a hill generates energy. Down, a flow goes into underground communications, further through the tunnels, to other nodes of the network, to cities, to fortresses, to those cathedrals with gilded domes and metal spires that we today consider simply beautiful buildings. A global energy system operating on the principles of wireless transmission and resonance. And then the water came. The flood that is spoken of in the legends of all peoples. The level of the ocean changed. The tunnels were flooded. Hills turned into islands. The system ceased to function as a whole. But individual nodes, the strongest and most durable, survived. Lighthouses remained sticking out above the water, damaged, but still capable of generating fields. Now a question. Who could have built such a system? Who possessed the stone processing technologies that allowed for the creation of tunnels beneath the seabed? And most importantly, when was this done if the lighthouses are now standing in the middle of the ocean, with their underground communications hidden beneath the thickness of the water? Look at the quality of the stonework of these towers. Take, for example, the Bell Rock Lighthouse, allegedly built in the early 19th century. Granite blocks weighing more than a ton each. They are connected with dovetail joints. Each joint is cut with such precision that not even a knife blade passes between the stones. Water does not penetrate the seams even after 1.5 centuries of constant exposure to storms. Try to imagine the process. You need to take a granite block. The hardness on the Mohs scale is 7 points, almost like hardened steel. Cut a complex 3-dimensional groove into it. Do this so that another block fits into it perfectly, without gaps. And repeat this operation thousands of times, because each block in the tower is unique. Each castle is tailored to a specific place in the structure. Today, coordinate measuring machines are used for such work. Each block is scanned with a laser, a digital model is created, and the machine is programmed. The allowable error is a fraction of a millimeter. And even with this, the seams require additional sealing. In old lighthouses, the seams are denser. Water does not pass through. The wind does not whistle. It is as if the stones have fused into a single whole. And now look at the optical systems of these towers. Fresnel lenses, supposedly installed in the mid-19th century. Each lens consists of hundreds of individual prismatic elements assembled with micron precision. The slightest error in the calculation of the angle of refraction, and the light beam will scatter, not reaching the horizon. Officially, we are told that the French physicist Augustin Jean Fresnel invented this system in 1822. But when you look at the finished lenses in old lighthouses, a question arises. How is it possible, in an era when glass was manually melted in small crucibles, to create optics of such quality? Without microscopes for control, without precise measuring instruments, without technologies for uniform cooling that prevent internal stresses in the glass, the masonry of the old lighthouses appears monolithic. It seems as though the entire tower is cast from a single piece of stone, and then decorative seams were applied for beauty. The optics are of ideal transparency, without bubbles and inclusions typical of glass from that period. This is not a technique of the 19th century. This is a technology that has either been lost or deliberately concealed. Now many will say, progress happened in leaps. There were geniuses of their time. All right, then explain why after these geniuses there remained only the results of their work, but neither textbooks, nor drawings, nor at least sketches of the technological process were left. Why were their methods not passed on to students? Why, just a generation later, were these technologies lost, and subsequent beacons were built more simply, more crudely, with obvious compromises in quality? To finally cement the myth of construction in the 19th century, evidence was required. Convincing, visual, mass evidence. And such evidence was created. In archives around the world, hundreds of photographs are stored, capturing the process of lighthouse construction. People in work clothes, wooden scaffolds leaned against the walls, buckets of mortar, brushes and trowels in hand. Only if you look a little closer, a strange pattern can be discovered. In all the photographs, without exception, the same moment is shown, the final stage. The building is already standing. The walls are erected. The columns are in place. The vaults are joined. The roof is almost ready. The workers are engaged in finishing, plastering, painting decorative elements. And where are the photos of the main construction? Where are the images of how they lay the foundation on bare rock? How they dig the pit in granite? How they transport multi-ton blocks to the island in the midst of the raging sea? How do they lift them to height without modern cranes? Where are the quarries from which the stone was taken? Where are the material depots? Where are the convoys or ships with cargo? These photographs do not exist. At all. Nowhere. Meanwhile, there are thousands of photos of the finishing works. It is as if the photographers were deliberately waiting for the last month of construction to capture only the finale. The most obvious explanation is that these photographs simply did not survive. Okay, but then how does it happen that all the others did? Why are there pictures of everyday life, portraits, landscapes from the same period in the same archives? But there is no construction documentation, no drawings with calculations, no estimates, no work production journals, nothing except for beautiful pictures with posing people. Look at these people more closely. They are not working. They are frozen in picturesque poses, looking at the lens. They hold the tools in their hands unsteadily, as if they picked them up a second ago specifically for the shot. In some photographs, the clothing is too clean for those who engage in heavy physical labor in dust and dirt. In others, the number of people on the scaffolding is clearly insufficient for the scale of the object. Wooden scaffolding also raises questions. Fragile constructions made of boards and poles tied with ropes. Such structures can support a few people with buckets of paint, but they are completely unsuitable for lifting and installing stone blocks weighing tons. Real construction would require powerful support systems, winches, pulleys, and rail tracks for transportation. There is nothing like that in the photographs. And the strangest thing is the absence of logistics. A construction of such scale requires a constant flow of materials: stone, lime, metal structures, wood for scaffolding. All of this needs to be stored somewhere, processed, and delivered. In a modern construction site, there are shacks, warehouses, access roads, and trailers for workers surrounding the object. But in old photographs around the lighthouses, there is emptiness. Or already improved streets, as if the tower had always stood here. The time frames also do not match. We are told that lighthouses were built over the years, sometimes decades. But then there should be a series of photos showing different stages. Photos taken at intervals of months or years, demonstrating the gradual rise of the building from foundation to completion. Instead, we see one or two shots of an almost finished object. This is not construction documentation. This is a theatrical production, a performance for future generations. They found an existing object, possibly half abandoned or in need of repair. They quickly conducted cosmetic repairs. They scraped off the coating, plastered, painted. They set up scaffolding, brought in workers, took photographs. Then they declared, "Here is the evidence. We built this." This scheme worked perfectly. Photography in the 19th century was a relatively new technology that inspired trust. People believed photographs more than drawings or engravings. If there are workers in the photo near a building, it means they are constructing it. No one thought to ask, why are there no photographs of the initial stages? Now a question. If lighthouses were not built in the 19th century, but simply appropriated and repaired, then who actually built them? And most importantly, when? When were these towers erected on land and not in the middle of the ocean? The shape of the lighthouses gives a hint. Narrow towers, widening at the base. Thick stone walls. Inside, cramped rooms, spiral staircases, low ceilings. For living, this is extremely uncomfortable. The keepers complained about the unbearable conditions. The psyche could not withstand not only the loneliness, but also the very atmosphere of these buildings. Why then build in such an inconvenient way if this place is for people? Why create entrance portals with columns and stucco if the building stands on a rock in the middle of the sea and no one will see it? Who will appreciate the architectural refinements? Fish and seagulls? The official version sounds plausible. It is an imperial style, a demonstration of the greatness of the state. And it sounds logical. Until you look at the map. France, Britain, America, Russia. Everywhere the same architecture, the same proportions, identical structural solutions, as if everyone built according to a single blueprint, slightly adapting it to local conditions. This is not style. This is function. The form of the lighthouse is dictated not by aesthetics, but by purpose. The narrow tower acts as a waveguide. The expansion at the base creates a resonance chamber. The thick stone walls are an insulator, and simultaneously a conductor for certain frequencies. The whole building is a tuned instrument, an antenna, a resonator, an energy transmitter. Architectural decorations also have meaning. Columns, arches, stucco. These are not just decor. In sacred architecture, every element carries a function. Certain proportions create resonance. Certain forms direct energy flows. What we perceive today as beauty was once an engineering calculation. These towers were not built for people. They were created as technical structures, nodes of the energy network. And they were built when cities were located around them on land. Cities whose inhabitants could appreciate the majestic architecture. Cities that now lie on the seabed. Recall the legends of sunken lands, Atlantis, Lemuria, Kiteshgrad, Lyonesse. The folklore of all peoples of the world preserves the memory of how the sea swallowed the land, how entire countries sank beneath the water, how the survivors moved to the heights while everything else was hidden in the depths. Lighthouses indicate sunken lands very specifically. Take the Eddystone Lighthouse off the coast of England. It stands on a rock around which the depth reaches 50 meters. However, sonar mapping of the seabed shows straight lines underwater, too straight to be natural. They stretch out from the rock in all directions, like rays from a center. Roads? Communications? Officially, this is explained as geological faults. But faults do not form right angles and do not diverge symmetrically. And here, everything becomes logical. Impossible structures suddenly acquire meaning. Underground tunnels connected lighthouses with other objects on land. The transportation of materials took place along roads that are now 50 meters underwater. The builders lived in towns at the foot of the hills and climbed to work using ordinary trails. All of this did not happen 10,000 years ago. It was much closer in time, perhaps just a few centuries ago. Because if you look at the seabed with modern means, there is discovered what official science prefers to remain silent about. Underwater plateaus around continents. Shelves that were once land. On many of them, geologists find strange structures, perfect geometric shapes, lines that cannot be natural formations, circles, squares, right angles, and often exactly in those places where lighthouses stand on the surface. Lighthouses mark the boundaries of flooded lands. They were border posts, geodetic markers, or nodes of the energy network, standing on high points along the perimeter of the inhabited territory. When the ocean rose, everything else was hidden. Only the tops remained, and we now call them lighthouses, navigational signs. Although initially they served entirely different purposes. Now let's put all the pieces together. Beacons are energy generators built by an advanced civilization. They stood on hills along the coast, connected by underground communications into a single network. They generated energy using mercury vortex mechanisms and the resonant properties of the structure itself. They transmitted this energy via wireless channels to other nodes of the system, to the star forts, which we today consider fortification structures, although their geometry is perfect for the distribution of energy flows. To the cathedrals with domes covered in gold and crowned with metal spires, perfect antennas. To the palaces and public buildings, in whose walls strange air ducts and channels of unknown purpose are still being found. Global network of wireless energy transmission. It operated on principles that were later attempted to be rethought by Nikola Tesla. He spoke of ether energy, of the possibility of transmitting electricity without wires, using the resonance of the planet itself. His research was curtailed. Funding was cut off. Documentation disappeared. The official version is that the project turned out to be unprofitable. In fact, Tesla tried to rediscover what already existed, to restore the technologies that a previous civilization possessed. But the new masters of the world found this disadvantageous. Free energy for all would mean a loss of control. Therefore, all research in this direction was blocked. Tesla was removed from history. His name is known, but his main discoveries are not discussed. When the keeper of the 19th century lit the kerosene lamp at the top of the lighthouse, he did not understand what he was doing. He did not know that he was activating a surviving node of an alien system, that ancient mechanisms continued to operate beneath his feet, that the mercury bads he thought were merely part of the rotational device were actually creating fields, and that these fields were slowly killing him. It was a tragedy of misunderstanding. People appropriated technologies whose meaning they did not comprehend. They settled in Chujiya homes. They tried to use Chujoya equipment, and they paid for it with their lives. Because you cannot live inside a working generator and not understand what you are dealing with. Now let's return to the question that should have arisen long ago. If lighthouses are indeed part of an ancient energy network, if they have been standing since before the flood, then how does official history explain their mass appearance in the 19th century? We are told about a boom in lighthouse construction, about thousands of new structures built worldwide over several decades. Let's look at the numbers. The middle of the 19th century. Europe is just recovering from the Napoleonic Wars. America is experiencing the Civil War. Russia is undergoing reforms after the Crimean catastrophe. Everywhere there is an economic crisis, a shortage of labor, and destroyed infrastructure. And so, in these conditions, a grand program for the construction of lighthouses supposedly begins. In the most dangerous, hard-to-reach areas of the coast, on cliffs in the middle of the ocean, where it is impossible to deliver materials, in conditions of constant storms, where it is impossible to work. Where the resources came from. Granite does not lie on the shore. It needs to be mined from quarries, processed, transported. Each lighthouse requires thousands of tons of stone, hundreds of tons of lime for the mortar, metal structures for reinforcement, optical systems of complex design, mercury, a rare and expensive substance. Where did the specialists come from? Masons capable of working with granite, engineers who can calculate the strength of a structure against the impacts of multi-ton waves, opticians creating lenses with jewel-like precision. All these people had to work simultaneously all over the world. Hundreds, if not thousands, of qualified specialists. The population statistics of that time do not match the volume of work. There were significantly fewer people than today. Life expectancy was shorter. Education was inaccessible to the majority. Technologies were primitive. Transport was slow. And cities were growing at an incredible pace. Grand buildings were appearing. Railways were being laid. And resources were still found for the construction of lighthouses in the ocean. This is a demographic paradox. The very moment when the numbers scream, something here is not right. Either the population was much larger than we are told, or technology is much more advanced. Or there was no mass construction at all. Anyone who has ever tried to build something with their own hands senses this catch. Even a small country house requires months of work, tons of materials, and a dozen workers. And here we are talking about structures in the middle of the sea, on bare rocks, in conditions where modern equipment barely manages. And all this was supposedly done by people with picks and shovels, in wooden boats, without electricity and communication. The only logical explanation becomes obvious when looking at the numbers. The census of the Russian Empire of 1897 shows 125 million people. Of them, less than 30% were literate. Qualified stonemasons, just a few thousand for the whole country. And construction is happening simultaneously in hundreds of locations. Someone had to train workers in complex technologies in just weeks. Someone had to coordinate the supply of materials across half a continent at a level of communication where a letter from Petersburg to Vladivostok took months. A classic scheme of substitution. Create the appearance of a process to hide the fact of appropriation. Organize photo shoots with workers on scaffolding. Write official reports about heroic labor. Award engineers and architects. And in a couple of generations, everyone will believe that we actually built this, our ancestors, in the recent past. But if you dig a little deeper, a gap is revealed. There are no blueprints, no calculations, no documentation on the technologies. There are only beautiful pictures and heroic stories, which fall apart at the first attempt to verify them with engineering calculations. And now, when we understand that there was no mass construction, let's go back to the very beginning, to the question that should have destroyed the official version immediately. How could these lighthouses have been built under the conditions described to us? Let's take a specific example. The Armen Lighthouse in France. Construction allegedly began in 1867. It is a solitary rock in the middle of the Atlantic, which shows above water only during low tide. Waves constantly cover it. Storms in this area reach 9 points and higher. The official history states that the workers were landed on the rock during short periods of calm. In the first year of work, they managed to get there 7 times, a total of 7 landings in 12 months. The total working time was 8 hours. During these 8 hours, they allegedly drilled holes in the granite for the foundation. Let's check. Granite has a hardness of 7 on the Mohs scale, almost like steel. To drill it, a special tool is needed: diamond coating or carbide crowns. In the mid-19th century, there was nothing like that. There were manual drills, steel rods with a cutting edge. It works like this. You hit the drill with a hammer, twist it, hit it again, millimeter by millimeter. Now imagine the conditions. You are standing waist deep in icy water. The rock is slippery from algae. Any wave can sweep you into the ocean. Around you, the wind splashes. It is impossible to see or breathe properly. Your hands are freezing so much that you cannot feel your fingers. And in these conditions, you must hit the drill accurately, rotate it, and deepen it into the stone. This is not just difficult, it is physiologically impossible. In 8 hours under such conditions, one can drill only a few centimeters at most. And for the foundation, holes are needed that are meters deep. Dozens, if not hundreds of such holes. The math does not add up. Let's move on. Suppose by a miracle the drilling was done. Now we need to deliver the materials. Thousands of tons of granite blocks. Each block weighs more than a ton. How to load them onto a wooden sailing ship? How to approach the rock in conditions of constant swell, when any approach threatens to smash the ship? In the 19th century, there were no dynamic positioning systems. The captain managed the ship, relying on the wind and current. Keeping a wooden ship in one place next to a rock, especially in waves, is an impossible task. And here it is necessary not just to hold, but also to unload a multi-ton cargo. To lower the blocks onto the rock without breaking them and not sinking them. Officially, this is explained by the use of fast hardening cements. Portland cement, for which a patent was obtained in 1824, supposedly solved the problem. However, the technologies of that time barely allowed for the production of quality mixtures for construction in calm harbors, where there is an opportunity to protect the masonry from water during the hardening process. Here, we are talking about waves covering fresh masonry every few minutes. Saline water erodes the lime mixtures of that period in just a few months. But the lighthouses have stood for a century and a half. The joints are monolithic. They do not deteriorate. Physics does not add up. Chemistry does not add up. Logistics does not add up. With any attempt to calculate the real process of construction, you hit a wall of impossibility. A technological wall, beyond which there can be only one answer. They did not build it the way we are told. The 19th century was an era of not creation, but appropriation. An era of looting on a global scale. Those who seized power after the catastrophe were engaged in inventory. They unearthed buried cities, cleared buildings of dirt, restored roads, adapted mechanisms to their needs, the principles of which they did not understand. Lighthouses were too visible, too monumental to be hidden or destroyed. Therefore, they were simply renamed, assigned, declared their achievement. A cosmetic renovation and photo shoot were conducted, and it was written in textbooks that we built this, our civilization, our engineers. We live in a world of total cargo cult. We look at cathedrals that work as acoustic resonators and think, it's just beautiful. We look at star fortresses with their perfect geometry and consider it just fortification. We see lighthouses capable of generating energy and believe that they are lanterns for ships. We are like children who found someone else's smartphone and use it to crack nuts. Because we do not understand what it is actually intended for. The greatest technologies of the planet have been turned into primitive tools, and we take pride in this. We consider it an achievement. The official history has turned. They shamelessly lied to you. Every time you enter the Hermitage or Versailles, you see not just interior items, but undeniable evidence of a global forgery that historians have been hiding for 200 years. Why are we told about the coolness at balls when physics guarantees heat stroke? Where have the tons of greasy soot gone that was supposed to destroy the unique frescoes in just one season? How did the servants manually lower a mass weighing as much as 5 cars without steel cables and winches, just to replace the stubs? And why are there no hints of a ventilation system in the palace walls that could draw out this heat? The main question is, what technology is being hidden from us behind the primitive tale of wax candles? Have you ever looked up in an ancient theater or palace? Not to admire the beauty of the ornate decorations, but to engage your brain. Look at these structures. Giant chandeliers made of bronze, crystal, and brass hang from the ceiling. Their weight is not measured in kilograms. 2 tons, 3 tons, sometimes 5 tons of metal and glass above your head at a height of 15 meters. This is the height of a 5-story building. And now remember school excursions. What did the tour guides tell you? They claim that in the 18th and 19th centuries, these massive structures lit the halls using ordinary wax candles. Every evening, hundreds of servants ran through the halls, lighting thousands of wicks. In the morning, they replaced the stubs with new ones. Do you really believe that? Think for a second. Imagine this process physically. Historians say that special mechanisms were used for maintenance. Allegedly, chandeliers were lowered on cables, the candles were changed, and then raised back up. This sounds logical only to those who have never worked with mechanics. Imagine the weight of such a construction. 3 tons. To lower 3 tons from a height of 15 meters, a complex winch mechanism hidden in the attic is needed. Historians usually talk about wooden winches with manual drive. It sounds simple, but calculate the effort. To hold 3 tons in a suspended state and lower it smoothly without jerks. A system of at least 8 blocks with a transmission ratio of 1:10 is needed. The team must pull 30 tons of rope through the system, manually. Now remember about friction. Each block takes away from 5 to 10% of the effort. 8 blocks mean a loss of half the force due to friction. The actual effort is doubled. And now imagine the fragility of the structure. The chandelier is not just a piece of metal. It is an ornate construction made of thin bronze rods, crystal, and glass. One awkward movement, one jerk of the rope, and all this beauty turns into a heap of shards. To avoid this, the most delicate adjustment of the descent speed is needed. And this means that the team must work in sync, like Swiss watches. But when we climb up to the attics of these palaces, what do we find? Rotten wooden beams, dust, and emptiness. Where are the steel cables? Where are the counterweight systems? Where are the reinforced ceilings that can withstand dynamic loads when such a machine is in motion? If the cable breaks, 3 tons of bronze will crash through the floor and descend into the basement, destroying the foundation. But we see no traces of such catastrophes. We see no reinforced beams in the ceiling. We see nothing. The most obvious explanation is that the mechanisms were dismantled later. All right, let's count the time. To carefully lower the fragile structure weighing several tons without jerking, it takes at least 40 minutes of a coordinated team's work. But this is the ideal scenario. In reality, the cables stretch. The blocks wear out. After each use, the system needs to be checked. Worn sections of the cable need to be replaced. The blocks need to be lubricated. This is another hour of preparation before each operation. Imagine this process. 10 people stand by the winches. One gives commands. The others synchronously turn the knobs. The speed of the descent must be perfect. If it's too fast, the chandelier will swing and start hitting the walls. If it's too slow, the whole operation will fall behind schedule. 40 minutes of continuous work under tension. Then it is necessary to replace 500 candles. Set up ladders around the chandelier lying on the floor. Remove the stubs. Clean the socket from soot and hardened wax. Insert new candles. Each candle takes at least 20 seconds of work. Remove the old one. Clean the socket with a metal brush. Insert a new one. Check that it fits tightly. Multiply 20 seconds by 500 candles. It comes to 10,000 seconds. That's almost 3 hours of pure work for one person. Now, many will say, 10 people worked at the same time. We divide by 10. In theory, yes. Let's divide 3 hours by 10. That makes 20 minutes for each person. But coordination kills efficiency. The stepladders are packed closely together. Elbows bump into each other. One person drops a candle and everyone stops, searching for it in the dark under the chandelier. Another needs to adjust the ladder. A third waits for space to free up. The actual ratio is not 1 to 10, but 1 to 5 at most. Add another hour just for coordination. In total, it's an hour and a half for changing the candles. Then the ascent. Another hour of strictly controlled movement. In total, 3 hours for one chandelier. In the Winter Palace, or Versailles, there are not just 1 or 2 of such chandeliers. There are hundreds. Count them. If each requires 3 hours of maintenance once a week, that's 600 hours of work per week. This means that an army of 80 people must have worked around the clock in the palace, only moving tons of metal up and down. Just for the chandeliers, not to mention everything else. This is a logistical absurdity. This is an economic black hole that would bankrupt any treasury. But the most interesting part begins when we think about the combustion products. 500 burning candles. Have you ever lit 10 candles at home simultaneously? After an hour, the room becomes stuffy. Now multiply that by 50. 500 sources of open flame. This is no longer lighting. This is a furnace. Let's apply some simple physics from 7th grade. One candle emits about 80 watts of thermal energy. Multiply by 500 candles in one chandelier. We get 40,000 watts, or 40 kilowatts, of thermal power. This is like turning on 20 powerful electric heaters in the room at full blast simultaneously. And if there are 3 such chandeliers in the hall, that is 120 kilowatts of heat under the ceiling. With such a heat load, the air in the upper part of the hall should heat up to 100 degrees. But the problem is not only with the temperature. 500 candles mean 500 sources of combustion. They consume oxygen, a lot of oxygen. One candle burns about 10 liters of air per hour. 500 candles consume 5,000 liters per hour. 3 chandeliers consume 15,000 liters per hour. In a hall with a volume of 3,000 cubic meters, all the oxygen would burn out in 4 hours. The ladies in corsets would faint not from sensitivity, but from asphyxiation and heat stroke at the same time. The wax in the candles would begin to melt by itself, not having the time to burn. A burning rain would drip on the guests' heads, on the expensive parquet, on the uniforms and dresses. It would not be a ball, but a torture chamber. Let's look at this from another angle. 120 kilowatts of heat in a closed space. The windows are closed in winter. The doors, too. Where does this energy go? Physics tells us that energy does not disappear. It either accumulates or leaves. If it leaves, then where? Through the walls? Stone walls 1 meter thick are excellent insulators. They hold heat, not release it. Therefore, the temperature in the room will inevitably rise. Imagine a ball that lasts 4 hours. During this time, 120 kilowatts continuously heat the air. After 1 hour, the temperature rises by 10 degrees. After 2 hours, it rises by 20 degrees. After 3 hours, the guests begin to lose consciousness. After 4 hours, the temperature in the hall reaches 50 degrees Celsius. This is the temperature of a bath. In ball gowns and tailcoats. But in the memoirs, we read about the coolness of the ballroom, about the freshness. People danced for 6 hours straight. No one writes about the boiling wax dripping from the ceiling, about the lack of air from the heat, that it was necessary to run outside every half hour to avoid suffocating. This does not add up. We have been deceived again. We have been presented with an image that does not withstand basic scrutiny of common sense. At first glance, it seems there was a ventilation system, and it sounds reasonable. Show me this system. Show me the ducts capable of sucking 120 kilowatts of heat from the hall. To divert such power, ducts with a cross-section of at least 1 meter by 1 meter are needed. Ventilation shafts that penetrate the entire building are required. A draft created by temperature differences or mechanical bellows is necessary. Where are the traces of these systems in the walls? They are absent. But the heat is only half the trouble. The main problem arises when we recall the soot. Natural wax, and especially tallow, which was used more often because of its low cost, releases soot when burned. A huge amount of greasy black soot. This is not theoretical reasoning. This is chemistry. When hydrocarbons burn under conditions of insufficient oxygen, particles of unburned carbon are formed. This is soot. The lower the quality of the fuel, the more soot there is. Tallow produces 3 times more soot than pure wax. According to the laws of physics, hot air lifts this soot upward, straight to the ceiling, to those magnificent frescoes, gilding, and stucco that we admire today. The soot particles are microscopic and fatty. They stick to any surface. They penetrate the pores of the plaster. They embed themselves in the paint. They settle in a thin layer on the gilding, turning gold into a gray-black mass. If they really burned candles there every evening, within a month, the ceilings would turn into a black, sooty mess. Calculate it. 500 candles burn for 4 hours. Each candle emits about 10 grams of soot during that time. We multiply by 500. It comes to 5 kilograms of soot in one evening. 3 chandeliers produce 15 kilograms of soot per ball. These 15 kilograms rise to the ceiling and evenly settle over an area of several hundred square meters. After a month, the layer of soot reaches a thickness of 1 millimeter. After a year, it is already a centimeter of thick black crust. The unique frescoes would be irretrievably destroyed in just 1 season of balls. Restorers know how difficult it is to wash soot from porous plaster. It is practically impossible to do so without damaging the paint layer. Soot penetrates deeply into the pores. It chemically binds with the components of the paint. To remove it, one has to either scrape off the top layer of plaster along with the painting, or use aggressive solvents that dissolve the paint itself. However, we are told that the palaces shone for centuries, that the frescoes have survived in their original form, that the gilding shines as if it was applied yesterday. This is only possible in one case: if there was no soot, if there were no candles. So, either they had some magical ventilation system that sucked up soot at the molecular level. By the way, we also don't find any traces of it, or, and this is much scarier for official science, there were no candles at all. Candles are a facade. They are a primitive explanation for those who have forgotten their technologies. Look carefully at the form of ancient chandeliers. Many of them structurally resemble complex antennas or resonators. The crystal in them is not just decoration. It is a dielectric and a diffuser. The metal base is a conductor. What if these candle holders were originally created not for fire at all? What if they were part of a unified energy system of the building? Pay attention to the geometry. The central shaft from which the branches diverge at strictly defined angles. Each branch ends with what we call a candlestick. But look closely at these candlesticks. Their shape is strange for their official function. Why create such a complex nest for a simple candle? Why such deep channels? Why metal inserts inside the ceramics or glass? And here the strangest part begins. In many old chandeliers that were not converted to electricity in the 20th century, researchers find unusual channels inside the bronze arms, hollow spaces that cannot fit a wire. A modern electrical wire is too thick for these channels, but they were clearly intended for something. The diameter of these channels is about 3 millimeters, too little for a wire in insulation, but perfect for a gas tube or capillary channel. Moreover, in some chandeliers, these channels are interconnected within the structure. These are not separate tubes for each arm. This is a single network that runs through the entire fixture and leads to the central rod. What is such a system for? If this is gas lighting, where are the burners? Where are the shutoff valves? Where are the signs of soot on the outlet openings? They are not there. The channels are clean. They look as if open fire has never passed through them. Perhaps the design of the chandelier itself was a receiver, and the candles were merely bulbs filled with inert gas, which began to glow in an electromagnetic field. Recall the school physics course. Daylight lamps work precisely like that. The gas in the tube is excited by an electric field and begins to glow. Cold light, without heat, without soot. What if cold light technology existed long before it was officially invented in the 20th century? What if we simply rediscovered what was known to the builders of these palaces? This explains everything. The absence of soot, the absence of mechanisms for constant lowering, the absence of a need for an army of servants. They simply worked. They shone with a cold, clean light, the nature of which we have lost. But there is one more damning fact that the tour guides keep silent about. Let us open the accounting books and construction estimates that historians proudly show us. They claim that these documents are irrefutable evidence of the construction of palaces in the 18th and 19th centuries. But upon closer examination, these papers turn out to be the biggest evidence of a global scam. Let's talk about candles. To illuminate a large palace, tons of wax were required each year. In the prices of that time, these were astronomical sums, comparable to the annual budget of a small European country. Let's do the math. One quality wax candle in the 18th century cost about the same as 1 kilogram of bread. That's not pocket change. That's money. 500 candles for one chandelier. They burn for 4 hours and burn out completely. So, each ball requires 500 new candles for the chandelier. 3 chandeliers in the hall mean 1,500 candles for the evening. 1 ball a week results in 6,000 candles a month, just for one hall. And there are dozens of halls in the palace. Multiply 6,000 by 20 halls. It results in 120,000 candles per month. 1,440,000 candles per year. Each candle costs as much as a kilogram of bread. This means that only for candles for lighting, it takes as much money as needed to buy 1,440 tons of bread. This is the annual norm of bread for 4,000 people. But besides the candles, there were other expenses. Heating with firewood. To warm up the halls with 6-meter-high ceilings in the harsh Russian winter, you need mountains of firewood. Calculate it. One fireplace burns about 20 kilograms of firewood per hour. In each hall, there are at least 2 fireplaces. They are heated for 10 hours a day. That's 400 kilograms of firewood per hall per day. 20 halls amount to 8 tons of firewood per day. 2,400 tons of firewood in the winter season. Food for thousands of servants. Maintenance of stables for hundreds of horses. Repair of parquet floors that get worn out. Laundry of thousands of tablecloths and curtains. Replacement of carpets. Furniture repair. If all these expenses are summed up, the upkeep of just the Winter Palace or Versailles must have consumed 10 to 15% of the entire state budget. This is an economic collapse. No treasury could withstand such a burden. But history tells us that at the same time, endless wars were waged. Fleets were built. New lands were developed. Where did the money come from? The answer is simple. There were no such expenses. The palaces were inherited by the new rulers in practically finished form. They did not require heating with firewood because an internal climate control system was functioning. They did not require tons of wax because another lighting system was in place. They did not require an army of servants because many processes were automated. The new owners did not understand how it worked. The systems gradually began to fail. That is when the transition to primitive technologies started. Stoves in halls with 5-meter ceilings. Candles in high-tech lamps. And to conceal this shameful regression, a legend of luxury and thousands of servants was invented. Look, a forensic examination of such historical documents, if it were allowed to be conducted, often reveals oddities. The paper and ink used for the estimates over 20 years were produced in the same year. The hand of the same scribe filled out the ledgers across different decades. This is not construction. This is forgery. Let's take a closer look at these accounting books. They are written in neat handwriting. The numbers are printed in even rows. Everything looks very convincing. But there is one problem: the paper. In the 18th century, paper was made by hand. Each sheet was unique. The thickness was uneven. The texture was heterogeneous. The watermarks varied from batch to batch. But when experts examine these old accounting books, they find something surprising. The paper is the same over the course of 20 years. The same batch, the same manufacturer, the same watermarks. This means that all the records were made at about the same time from one stock of paper. Someone sat down and wrote the history of 20 years of construction in a few months. The ink tells the same story. Chemical analysis shows that the composition of the ink has not changed. In the 18th century, ink was made from tannins and iron sulfate. Recipes changed from year to year. The quality depended on the harvest of oak bark. But in these documents, the ink is identical, from the first to the last page. And now look at the signatures. Contractors and architects signed the documents over the course of 20 years. But the graphological examination shows that the handwriting does not change. A person at 20 writes differently than at 40. With age, the handwriting becomes either firmer or more tremulous. The pressure changes. The angle of the letters changes. But nothing changes here. It is as if all the signatures were made in one day. Let's take any large palace complex. Officially, it was built, say, for 20 years. The project involved tens of thousands of serfs, hundreds of craftsmen, and several architects. The figures on paper look impressive. But let's compare them with reality. A modern skyscraper using steel frames, concrete, cranes, and computer modeling is built in 3 to 5 years. We are asked to believe that a giant stone palace with perfect geometry, intricate vaults and domes, was built by hand with the help of ropes, horses, and primitive levers in just 20 years. Let's calculate the labor costs. To lay 1 cubic meter of masonry, it takes approximately 8 person-hours of work. This includes preparing the stone, transporting it to the site, installing, leveling, and sealing the joints. The volume of an average palace is approximately 300,000 cubic meters of masonry. We multiply by 8 man-hours. We get 2,400,000 man-hours just for the wall masonry, not counting the foundation, roof, finishing, stucco, parquet, and everything else. If the working day lasts 10 hours, and they work 300 days a year, one person contributes 3,000 man-hours per year. Dividing 2,400,000 by 3,000 results in 800 person years just for the masonry. If we build for 20 years, We need a constant team of 40 masons who do nothing but lay the walls, without breaks, without illnesses, without generational change, 20 years in a row. This is just for the masons. Additionally, we need carpenters, roofers, plasterers, artists, gilders, and parquet workers. Multiply 40 stonemasons by 5 specialties. The result is 200 highly skilled masters who have been working for 20 years non-stop, plus thousands of laborers who carry materials, dig trenches, and mix mortar. Where did they get so many people? Where did they live? What did they eat? Where did they get their tools? This is a logistical nightmare about which there is not a word in the documents. It is physically impossible. A simple calculation shows that such construction would require not 20, but at least 150 years of continuous work. This means that one generation began the construction while their great-grandchildren finished it. But in the documents, we see the same contractors, the same architects throughout the entire period. Were they immortal? Or maybe these documents are just a beautiful fairy tale written retrospectively. Consider why, in the 19th century, the era of steam and steel, there was suddenly a boom in architectural styles of the past. Neoclassicism, Gothic Revival, Neo-Renaissance. Why did engineers building railroads and steamships suddenly start copying ancient temples and medieval castles? This is strange. It is illogical. Progress should move forward, not backward. When humanity masters new technologies, it does not return to old forms. When steamboats appeared, no one started building wooden galleys in the style of ancient Phoenicians. When airplanes appeared, no one copied the shape of airships. But in the 19th century, something strange happened. Architecture began to copy the past. You will be told that this was a fashion trend, Romanticism, interest in classical forms. Okay, but fashion does not explain the scale. Entire cities were being rebuilt in a unified style. Paris transformed into a neoclassical capital. London donned neo-Gothic attire. St. Petersburg copied antiquity. This was not fashion. This was a program. Because they did not copy, they restored. They dug out from under multi-meter layers of clay and dirt the buildings of the previous civilization and put them in order. Look at old photographs of cities from the mid-19th century. You will see a strange picture. Majestic buildings stand knee-deep in the ground. The first floors are buried. Doors have turned into windows. Streets run at the level of the second floor. We are told that this is a cultural layer. Trash has accumulated for centuries. But 3 meters of trash in 100 years? That means the ground level rose by 3 centimeters each year. Every year, the residents of the city would have to add 3 centimeters of dirt to the streets and not clean it up. This is absurd. No one lives like that. What we are called construction was in fact a large-scale restoration and remodeling. They installed extra windows. They chiseled off incomprehensible symbols. They added their primitive entrances and hung their coats of arms. And to legitimize ownership of these trophies, they hired an army of historians who wrote a beautiful legend about the great ancestor builders for each building. Architects whose names we see on blueprints are often just foremen who supervised the restoration. Where are their schools? Where are their students? Why has the genius who built one grand structure not created anything similar since? Take any well-known architect of the 19th century. Study his biography. You will find strange gaps. It is unknown where he studied. It is unknown from whom. It is unknown how he acquired the knowledge to create such complex projects. Then, suddenly, he appears on the scene with a finished design for a grand building. He builds it in record time, and then he disappears. He creates nothing more significant. Officially, this is explained as a self-taught genius. But geniuses do not emerge out of thin air. Years of training are needed to create complex architectural projects. One must know the resistance of materials. One must understand the properties of materials. One must be able to calculate loads. All this requires systematic education. But there are no traces of this education. There are no workshops where he practiced. There are no rough drafts that show the development of skills. There are no teachers who could confirm his training. Moreover, many of these architects came from completely different fields: gardeners, decorators, artists. And suddenly, they are designing buildings that stand for centuries. The transition from one field to another is usually accompanied by a multitude of failures. The first projects of young architects often have mistakes. Buildings crack, arches collapse. But these masters have no mistakes, no drafts, no failed projects. The first building is perfect, as if someone simply took ready-made blueprints and presented them as their own. Because he didn't build anything, he adapted. He was not a creator, but an adapter. The real engineers who created these palaces vanished along with their civilization. Only their creations remain, as silent witnesses to past greatness and our total ignorance. We live in the decor of a foreign world, not understanding their true purpose. And chandeliers are the key to the riddle. As long as we believe in the fairy tale about candles, the whole system of lies holds together. But as soon as we ask a simple question about how candles were changed at a height of 20 meters, the entire house of cards of official history begins to collapse. The analysis of old maps and engravings shows cities with wide avenues designed for millions of residents, while historians tell us that the cities had 30,000 inhabitants. Why would 30,000 people need a 100-meter wide avenue? Why would they need a cathedral that accommodates 10,000 people at once? Look at the scale of the buildings. Doors 5 meters tall. Windows the size of a modern bus. Stairs that are uncomfortable for an ordinary person to ascend. Everything is designed for different proportions, for a different population density, for a different way of life. Before the catastrophe, the population density was dozens of times higher. Civilization was global, unified, and highly developed. Then, something happened. War. A strike from space. Planetary cleansing. The population was reduced by 90%. Few survived, mostly children and marginalized people who had no access to technology. They entered the surviving city palaces. They found stockpiles of clothing, which often was too large for them. They found dishes and utensils, and they began to live, inventing legends about the masters of antiquity. These little people looked at the chandeliers hanging under the arches of the surviving buildings with sacred awe, not understanding how to turn them on. They saw strange channels in the bronze horns. They saw crystal pendants that were clearly not just decorations, but the knowledge was lost, and they inserted candles into them. primitive wax candles, because that was the only thing they understood. That is precisely why the topic of the Luxtor is so important. It is a marker. It is proof that the technological framework of the past surpassed our own. We still cannot replicate the masonry of polygonal walls. We cannot create a brick composition that lasts 300 years and rings like metal. And we cannot explain why to hang 3 tons of bronze overhead if it is just a candlestick. This question leads to others, about materials, about technologies, about money, about datings. And at the end of this chain, a shocking discovery awaits us about who we are and what kind of world we actually live in. Let us call things by their names. What happened in the 19th century was a global reset, a great reset of humanity. Some force destroyed the old world, a world where energy was free and accessible to everyone like air. A world where there were no borders, no states in the current understanding, and no division into masters and slaves. A unified architecture on all continents, from St. Petersburg to Melbourne, from Paris to San Francisco, shouts this to us. Look at the buildings in different corners of the planet. They are built according to the same blueprints, the same columns, the same arches, the same domes, as if a single architect designed the entire world, or a single civilization spread across the planet before it was wiped out. It was a unified world with a single standard of living. Chandeliers and palaces, domes of temples, obelisks and spires. All these are elements of a global energy system. This was a wireless energy transmission network. Remember Nikola Tesla's experiments in the early 20th century. He built a tower in Wardenclyffe for wireless energy transmission. His funding was abruptly cut off when it became clear that it worked. Tesla did not invent. He attempted to restore what already existed. He gained access to the surviving knowledge, or found working fragments of an old system, and he was immediately stopped. Why? Because free energy is the end of the modern control system.
No, because he's
If a person can receive heat and light from the air, they cannot be controlled through meters. They cannot be made to pay. They cannot be kept dependent. All our civilization is built on the sale of energy. Oil, gas, electricity. Billions of dollars revolve around the right to sell you what was once free. That is why the technologies of the old world were destroyed. That is why chandeliers no longer work as light generators. That is why we believe in the fairy tale about candles. We live in houses built not for us. Look at the proportions. Doors 3 meters wide. Windows 4 meters high. Staircases where each step is 30 centimeters high. Try to climb such a staircase comfortably. It won't work. This is designed for another height, another stride. Furniture in old palaces is also strange. Tables 1 meter 10 high. Chairs that do not allow feet to touch the floor. Beds the size of a modern room. Everything is too large for an ordinary person of the 18th century, whose average height was 160 centimeters. They did not understand the purpose of half of the things. They called energy generators candlesticks. They heated fireplaces in halls with automatic climate control. They burned candles under chandeliers that could light up themselves. But the chandeliers remember. They hang up there, heavy and silent, weighing several tons, too heavy for mere decoration, too complex for primitive candles, too perfect for the technologies of the 18th century. And each time you lift your head and see this structure, remember one simple question. How did they change the candles? Because if you start thinking about it, if you start counting, if you start comparing facts, the whole beautiful fairy tale of official history collapses into dust. 3 hours to service one chandelier. 120 kilowatts of heat under the ceiling. 15 kilograms of soot per ball. 2,400,000 man-hours for construction. 1,440,000 candles per year. Numbers don't lie. People lie. Technologies have disappeared. Knowledge has been erased. Blueprints have been burned. Only a legend remains that all of this was created by our ancestors with hammers and chisels. That they hung 3-ton chandeliers to burn candles in them. That they built halls with 6-meter ceilings for beauty. That they spent half of the state budget on wax. This is a lie. Every chandelier that hangs up there is a silent witness to a crime. Evidence that our past and future have been stolen from us simultaneously. 3 tons of bronze and crystal know the truth. They remember how they worked without fire, without soot, without candles. They are waiting for us to remember how to turn them on. Subscribe to the channel. Do not forget to hit the bell so you don't miss new inventions. You have been brazenly deceived. We are told that the Industrial Revolution is the result of the natural development of the human mind. But if we compare dates and technologies, the official version of history turns into absurdity. Where does a Serbian peasant's knowledge, which is a century ahead of academic science, come from? Why do complex engineering solutions appear instantly and in a ready-made form without decades of evolution? Why was the study of ether, on which all physics of the previous 300 years was built, suddenly banned in the 20th century? The main question is, who and why made us believe that we invented this, rather than just dug it up? Open any patent database from the last 300 years. The American Patent Office, the European Patent Office, the database of the World Intellectual Property Organization. Take Excel or any graphing tool. Input the data on the number